The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, smelling faintly of tobacco and prairie dust. Sarah Bennett held it with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the words that promised a new life somewhere far from Boston. She was 23 years old, and her hands bore scars that no amount of lace gloves could hide. The mirror in her boarding room reflected a woman with hollow cheeks and eyes that had forgotten how to dream. She had answered the advertisement 3 weeks ago, desperate for escape, willing to marry a stranger if it meant leaving behind the nightmare that had become her existence. Her husband, Thomas, had died 6 months earlier. The church ladies called it a tragedy. Sarah called it mercy. For 5 years, she had endured his fists, his rage, his promises that tomorrow would be different. The bruises had faded, but the damage ran deeper than skin. She flinched at sudden movements. She couldn't sleep without a candle burning. She had learned to make herself small, invisible, worthless. When Thomas fell from his horse and broke his neck, Sarah stood at his grave and felt nothing but relief. Then came the shame, hot and suffocating, because what kind of woman felt glad her husband was dead? The boarding house where she now lived was run by Mrs. Hendricks, a sharp-eyed widow who asked too many questions. The rent was due in 3 days, and Sarah had exactly $4 to her name. Her family had disowned her after the marriage. They had warned her about Thomas, about his drinking and his temper, but she had been young and foolish and convinced that love could change anyone. Now she knew better. Love didn't heal broken men. It just gave them someone to break. The letter was from someone named Running Wolf, though the handwriting suggested it had been written by another hand, perhaps a translator or a missionary. He was a Lakota chief living in the Dakota Territory, seeking a wife who could teach English to the children of his tribe and help bridge the gap between his people and the encroaching white settlers. The proposal was straightforward and honest. He offered protection, a home, and respect. He asked for companionship, patience, and an open heart. He didn't promise love, which Sarah found strangely comforting. She had learned that love was just another word for possession. She read the letter 7 times that day. Each time, she tried to picture the man who had dictated those words. Was he kind? Was he cruel? Would he expect things from her that she could no longer give? The thought of intimacy made her stomach twist. Thomas had taken something from her that she didn't know how to reclaim. She wondered if Running Wolf would be angry when he discovered how damaged she was, how fractured and incomplete. That night, Sarah sat at the small writing desk in her room and composed her reply. Her hand shook so badly that the first 2 attempts ended up in the wastepaper basket. In the final version, she was honest. She told him she was a widow. She told him she could read and write and teach. She didn't tell him about the scars, about the way she sometimes woke up screaming, about the emptiness that lived inside her chest like a winter that never ended. Some truths were too heavy to put in letters. She posted the reply the next morning before she could change her mind. Then she waited. The days stretched into weeks. Sarah took in mending to pay her rent, her fingers moving mechanically through the fabric while her mind wandered west to a place she had never seen, to a man she had never met, to a future that terrified and tantalized her in equal measure. She had nothing left to lose except her life, and lately, that hadn't seemed worth much anyway. When the second letter arrived with money for passage and instructions for the journey, Sarah Bennett began to pack her few belongings. She was going to become someone else, somewhere else. She was going to disappear into the vast American frontier and pray that the woman she had been would finally stay buried in Boston, along with all her ghosts. The train rattled westward like a mechanical beast, swallowing miles of countryside with each passing hour. Sarah pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, watching Boston fade into memory. The other passengers kept their distance. Perhaps they sensed something broken in her, some invisible mark that warned them away. A woman traveling alone was already suspicious. A widow heading to marry a stranger was practically scandalous. Sarah had learned to ignore the whispers and sidelong glances. She had survived worse than gossip. The journey took 9 days. The train carried her through Pennsylvania's rolling hills, across Ohio's farmlands, through the sprawling chaos of Chicago, and finally into the endless plains of the Dakota Territory. The landscape changed dramatically as they traveled west. Trees gave way to grasslands that stretched to the horizon like a golden ocean. The sky seemed impossibly large, unmarred by factory smoke or church steeples. Sarah felt simultaneously insignificant and liberated. Out here, she was just another speck in the vastness. Her past seemed smaller with every mile. At Fort Pierre, she transferred to a stagecoach. The driver was a weathered man named Calhoun who chewed tobacco and spoke little. 2 other passengers shared the cramped space, a stern missionary woman named Mrs. Crawford and a young soldier returning to his post. Mrs. Crawford made her opinions clear immediately. She thought Sarah was making a terrible mistake. Marrying a savage, she called it, her voice dripping with contempt. The Indians were heathens, she insisted, barely civilized, prone to violence and deception. Sarah listened without responding. She had been married to a civilized white man, and he had nearly killed her. She was willing to take her chances with a savage. The stagecoach journey was brutal. The roads were little more than rutted trails. Dust coated everything. Sarah's body ached from the constant jostling. They stopped at trading posts and small settlements, places where white and Indian cultures collided awkwardly. She saw Lakota people for the first time at one such stop, a family trading buffalo hides for flour and sugar. The woman wore a beautiful dress decorated with quill work and beads. Her children stared at Sarah with open curiosity. Sarah stared back, wondering if these people would become her neighbors, her community, her family. On the sixth day, Calhoun pointed to a distant cluster of teepees near a bend in the river. That's where he was taking her. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Terror and anticipation tangled together until she couldn't tell them apart. What if Running Wolf took one look at her and sent her back? What if he was cruel? What if she had escaped one prison only to walk willingly into another? Mrs. Crawford prayed loudly for Sarah's soul as they approached. The soldier checked his rifle nervously. Sarah simply clutched her carpetbag and tried to breathe. The village was larger than she expected. Dozens of teepees formed a loose circle near the water. Horses grazed nearby. Children played while women worked at various tasks. Men sat in groups, talking and smoking. Everyone stopped and stared as the stagecoach rolled to a halt. Sarah had never felt so exposed, so completely out of place. She was a pale ghost in her dark traveling dress, surrounded by people whose language she didn't speak, whose customs she didn't understand, whose world she was attempting to enter without invitation or preparation. Then he appeared. Running Wolf walked toward the stagecoach with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his long black hair decorated with feathers and beads. His face was striking, high cheekbones, strong jaw, eyes that seemed to see straight through her pretenses. He wore traditional clothing, leather leggings, and a shirt adorned with intricate beadwork. He looked nothing like any man Sarah had ever known. He looked powerful and dangerous and completely foreign. She felt her courage falter. Calhoun helped her down from the stagecoach. Her legs wobbled from days of travel. Running Wolf approached slowly, studying her with an intensity that made her want to hide. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. He welcomed her to his village. He thanked her for making the long journey. His voice was deep and steady, lacking the false charm that Thomas had wielded like a weapon. Sarah managed a small nod, unable to trust her voice. Mrs. Crawford climbed out behind her, immediately launching into a speech about Christian duty and salvation. Running Wolf listened politely, his expression unreadable. Then he dismissed her with a simple gesture and turned his full attention to Sarah. He asked if she was tired. If she was hungry. If she needed rest before they talked. His concern seemed genuine, which unsettled her more than hostility would have. She wasn't accustomed to men who considered her needs. She mumbled something about being fine, though she was exhausted and terrified and desperately homesick for a place that had never truly been home. Running Wolf nodded and gestured for her to follow. As she picked up her bag, Mrs. Crawford grabbed her arm. Last chance to turn back, the missionary hissed. Sarah pulled free and followed the Lakota chief into the village, leaving her last connection to white civilization behind. Running Wolf led Sarah to a teepee set slightly apart from the others. It was beautiful, the hide covering decorated with painted symbols she couldn't decipher. He held the entrance flap open and gestured for her to enter. Inside, the space was clean and organized. Furs covered the floor. A small fire pit sat in the center, the smoke rising through the opening at the top. Parfleche bags lined the walls, along with weapons, clothing, and various tools. It was foreign and intimate and suddenly very real. Sarah stood frozen just inside the entrance, her bag still clutched in her white-knuckled grip. Running Wolf entered behind her, his presence filling the space. She instinctively took a step back, her body remembering before her mind could catch up. He noticed. Of course he noticed. His eyes narrowed slightly, but not with anger. With understanding. He raised both hands slowly, palms out, and took a deliberate step backward. The gesture was so unexpected that Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. He spoke then, his voice gentle. He told her this teepee would be hers for now. She could rest, eat, and recover from the journey. There was no rush to make decisions or to fulfill any obligations. He wanted her to feel safe. The word struck her like a physical blow. Safe. When was the last time she had felt safe? Running Wolf continued, explaining that his sister, Wakhaing Waistemna, would bring her food and help her settle in. Tomorrow, when she was rested, they would talk about the arrangement and what she wanted from this new life. He asked for nothing tonight except that she take care of herself. Then he left, slipping out of the teepee as quietly as he had entered. Sarah stood alone in the dimming light, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. A man, her supposed husband, had brought her to his home and then left her alone. He had seen her fear and responded with retreat rather than anger. He had offered her space and time and autonomy. It was so contrary to everything she had learned about marriage that she didn't know how to react. She sank onto the furs, her legs finally giving out. The carpet bag fell from her numb fingers. She had prepared herself for so many scenarios: violence, demands, disappointment, rejection. She had not prepared for kindness. Kindness was more disarming than cruelty because she had no defenses against it. Thomas had been kind at first too, she reminded herself. Kindness could be a mask that men wore until they had you trapped. But even as she thought it, she knew this felt different. Running Wolf's kindness hadn't been performative or manipulative. It had been practical and observant. He had seen her trauma and adjusted his behavior accordingly, expecting nothing in return. Wakhaing Waistemna arrived as the sun set. She was younger than Sarah, perhaps 19 or 20, with a quick smile and gentle demeanor. She carried a wooden bowl filled with stew and some kind of bread. She didn't speak English well, but she communicated through gestures and simple words. She showed Sarah where to find water, where to relieve herself, how to manage the fire. She touched Sarah's sleeve and said pretty, though the dress was plain and travel-stained. When she left, she squeezed Sarah's hand, and something in that simple gesture felt like a promise. Sarah ate the stew slowly. It was delicious, rich with meat and vegetables she couldn't identify. The bread was dense and filling. Her body, pushed beyond exhaustion, began to relax despite her racing mind. She arranged the furs into a sleeping place and lay down, expecting nightmares. Instead, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind she hadn't experienced since before her marriage to Thomas. She woke to birdsong and morning light filtering through the teepee walls. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory rushed back, the journey, the village, Running Wolf's unexpected gentleness. She sat up, her body stiff but more rested than it had been in months. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the village waking: voices, laughter, horses nickering, dogs barking. It sounded alive in a way Boston never had. Running Wolf came to her teepee mid-morning, calling from outside before entering. He brought more food and a bundle of clothes. He explained that Wakhaing Waistemna had made her a dress in the Lakota style, thinking she might be more comfortable in it than her heavy traveling clothes. He was right. The dress was beautiful, soft deer hide decorated with simple beadwork. Sarah ran her fingers over it, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. They talked for hours. Running Wolf explained his vision for the village, the pressures his people faced from settlers and soldiers, the importance of education for the children. He was remarkably articulate, switching between English and Lakota as he described his hopes and fears for his tribe's future. He asked about Sarah's life in Boston, but when he sensed her reluctance, he didn't push. He told her about his own past, his warrior days, his ascension to chief after his father's death, his love for his people and the land. He spoke with a passion that was magnetic yet unthreatening. Sarah found herself talking more than she intended. She told him about teaching in a small school before her marriage. She described her love of books and learning. She admitted her fear that she wouldn't be useful here, that she wouldn't understand the culture enough to truly help. Running Wolf listened without interruption, his dark eyes focused entirely on her. When she finished, he smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. The transformation was startling. He told her that her honesty was the greatest gift she could offer his people. They didn't need someone who pretended to have all the answers. They needed someone willing to learn alongside them. As he stood to leave, Sarah gathered her courage and asked the question that had been burning in her mind since arrival. What did he expect from this marriage? When would the ceremony take place? What were his expectations for intimacy? The words tumbled out in a rush, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Running Wolf paused at the entrance. He turned back to her, his expression serious but kind. He told her there would be no ceremony until she asked for one. There would be no intimacy until she wanted it. He had not brought her here to own her or use her. He had brought her here because he needed help protecting his people's future, and he believed she might need protection too. The marriage was a formality for the white authorities who might question her presence. Everything else would happen only if and when she chose it. Then he left her alone with her thoughts once more, this stranger who was slowly becoming something more. The days fell into a rhythm that Sarah had never experienced before. She woke with the sun and spent her mornings learning Lakota from Wakhaingwe Stemna, who proved to be an endlessly patient teacher. In return, Sarah taught her English. The language barrier that had seemed insurmountable began to crumble, word by word, gesture by gesture. Laughter became their common tongue when words failed. Sarah discovered that laughter felt good, felt healing, felt like something she had forgotten existed. The children were her greatest challenge and her greatest joy. Running Wolf introduced her to 7 children ranging in age from 5 to 12. Their parents wanted them to learn English, to understand the white man's world without losing their own. Sarah set up a teaching area outside when weather permitted, using a flat stone as a makeshift board and sticks to write in the dirt. She taught them letters and numbers, reading and writing. They taught her about their world, how to identify edible plants, how to read weather signs, how to move quietly through grass, how to find joy in simple things. A girl named Thathienka Wieng, which meant Buffalo Woman, attached herself to Sarah immediately. She was 8 years old, bright-eyed and curious, with a hunger for knowledge that reminded Sarah of herself at that age. Thathienka Wieng asked endless questions, not just about English but about everything. What was Boston like? What was the ocean like? Why did white women wear so many layers? Did Sarah have children? The last question always made Sarah's chest tighten. She had been pregnant once, briefly, during her marriage. Thomas had beaten her during one of his rages, and she had lost the baby. She had grieved alone, and part of her had been grateful because how could she bring a child into that hell? She deflected Thathienka Wieng's question with a gentle smile and redirected to the lesson. But the girl was perceptive. She reached out and took Sarah's hand, squeezing it with surprising strength for someone so small. The gesture, so simple and pure, cracked something open inside Sarah. She squeezed back, blinking away sudden tears. Running Wolf watched her teaching from a distance, never intrusive but always aware. Sarah felt his presence like a warm shadow, protective without being possessive. He would sometimes join the lessons, asking questions that helped the children understand connections between languages. His mind was sharp and strategic. He saw education not as abandoning Lakota culture but as armor against those who would exploit ignorance. Sarah respected his vision deeply. Evenings were for storytelling. The village would gather, and elders would share tales of creation, of trickster spirits, of brave warriors and wise women. Sarah listened, mesmerized by the rich oral tradition. Sometimes Running Wolf would translate for her, his voice low and steady beside her. Other times she simply absorbed the rhythm and emotion, understanding more than she expected. She began to see the world through a different lens, one where land was sacred, where community mattered more than individual wealth, where spirituality was woven into daily life rather than confined to Sunday services. One evening, Running Wolf invited her to walk with him along the river. Sarah hesitated, old fears rising like ghosts. But something in his patient expression made her nod. They walked in comfortable silence at first, the setting sun painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber. He asked how she was adjusting. She told him truthfully, better than expected but still feeling like a stranger in a strange land. He nodded, understanding. He confessed that he often felt like a stranger too, caught between honoring tradition and ensuring survival in a changing world. Sarah found herself asking about his life, really asking, curious rather than merely polite. He told her about losing his wife 3 years ago to illness. They had been married young, had loved deeply, and her death had broken something in him. He had thrown himself into leading his people, into planning and protecting, leaving no room for personal grief. Sarah recognized the strategy. It was the same one she had employed after Thomas died, filling every moment with activity so she wouldn't have to feel the weight of everything that had happened to her. They sat on the riverbank as stars began to emerge. Running Wolf picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. He said something that would stay with Sarah forever. He said that pain was like this river, always moving, always changing, sometimes raging and sometimes calm, but always there. You couldn't dam it up or make it disappear. You could only learn to move with it, to let it flow through you without drowning in it. Sarah felt those words sink into her bones. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt like someone truly understood the landscape of her grief. She told him then, haltingly, about her marriage. Not everything, not the worst of it, but enough. She told him about the fear, the isolation, the way Thomas had made her believe she was worthless and crazy and deserving of pain. She told him about the relief and guilt she felt at his death. She told him she was broken in ways she didn't know how to fix. Running Wolf listened without judgment or pity. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. He told her she wasn't broken. She was wounded, which was different. Broken things couldn't heal. Wounded things could, given time and care and patience. He said the spirit was more resilient than people believed. It could bend without breaking, could scar without dying, could find new ways to grow around old injuries. He said he saw strength in her, not weakness. The fact that she was here, trying to build a new life despite everything, proved her spirit was intact. Damaged, yes. But whole where it mattered most. Sarah cried then, deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place she had kept locked tight for years. Running Wolf didn't try to stop her or comfort her or fix her. He simply sat beside her, a steady presence, and let her cry until the tears ran dry. When she finally composed herself, embarrassed by the outburst, he stood and offered his hand. She took it, feeling the calluses and strength, and let him help her to her feet. They walked back to the village in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, one that held understanding and acceptance rather than awkwardness or fear. Winter came to the prairie with fierce beauty. Snow blanketed the grasslands, transforming the landscape into something otherworldly and pure. The village adapted, teepees reinforced against the cold, activities shifting to survival and storytelling. Sarah had been with the Lakota for 4 months now, and somewhere along the way, the foreign had become familiar. She moved through the village with growing confidence, her Lakota improving daily, her role as teacher expanding to include not just children but adults curious about the changing world beyond their territory. She also learned from them. Wakhaing Waistemna taught her to tan hides and do quill work. The elder women taught her which herbs healed which ailments, how to prepare pemmican for long winters, how to read the subtle signs that indicated change was coming. Sarah's hands, once soft and scarred, grew strong and capable. She learned to find satisfaction in creating useful things, in contributing to the community's well-being. Purpose, she discovered, was better medicine than any doctor could prescribe. Her relationship with Running Wolf had deepened into something neither of them had anticipated. They spent hours together, talking about everything and nothing. He taught her to ride horses properly, to track animals in snow, to understand the complex social structures of his people. She taught him about literature and philosophy, about the wider world of politics and industry that threatened to swallow the Lakota way of life. They became friends first, genuine friends, which was something Sarah had never experienced with a man before. The shift happened gradually, like seasons changing. Sarah began to notice the way Running Wolf's eyes crinkled when he smiled. The warmth of his presence when he sat close during evening gatherings. The way her heart lifted when she saw him returning from hunting trips. She found herself watching him, curious about the man beneath the chief. He was patient with children, respectful to elders, fiercely protective of his people, but also funny and occasionally irreverent. He would tease her about her stubborn insistence on proper grammar, and she would mock his tendency to overthink simple problems. Their banter felt natural, felt right, felt like home. One particularly cold night, a blizzard trapped everyone inside their teepees. Sarah's fire was struggling, smoke filling the space despite her efforts. Running Wolf appeared, called inside by Wakhaing Waistemna, who had noticed the problem. He fixed the ventilation quickly, his movements efficient and sure. Then he prepared to leave, to brave the storm back to his own shelter. Sarah heard herself ask him to stay. The word surprised them both. Running Wolf studied her carefully, searching for fear or obligation in her expression. He found neither. Sarah's invitation was genuine, born from desire for his company rather than duty or expectation. He stayed. They sat on opposite sides of the fire at first, talking about inconsequential things while the storm raged outside. Eventually, Sarah moved closer, drawn by warmth and something deeper. She asked him about his wife, about their love, about how he had survived losing her. Running Wolf spoke honestly about grief, about the empty space that never quite filled, about learning to carry loss without being crushed by it. Then he said something that made Sarah's breath catch. He said he had given up on feeling alive again until she arrived. Her strength, hidden beneath layers of trauma, had reminded him that survival wasn't enough. That there was value in connection, in vulnerability, in allowing yourself to care despite knowing loss was always possible. Sarah reached across the space between them and took his hand. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact with a man since Thomas died. Running Wolf's hand was warm and steady, calloused from work and war. He didn't pull her closer or make assumptions about what the gesture meant. He simply held her hand and waited, giving her complete control over what happened next. She told him she was afraid. Afraid of intimacy, afraid of trust, afraid that her damage would poison anything good between them. He told her fear was reasonable, not weakness. That moving forward despite fear was the definition of courage. He promised they would go as slowly as she needed, that nothing would happen until she was certain, that his respect for her was unconditional and permanent. His words were a balm to wounds Sarah had thought would never heal. They fell asleep that night side by side, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. It was chaste and profound, more intimate than anything Sarah had experienced in her marriage. She woke feeling safe, truly safe, for the first time in years. Running Wolf was awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her eyes sting with tears. He brushed a strand of hair from her face and asked if she was all right. She nodded, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling through her. He seemed to understand anyway. Spring arrived with dramatic transformation. The prairie exploded with wildflowers and new life. The village prepared for the buffalo hunt, for ceremonies that marked the turning of seasons. Sarah had been living among the Lakota for nearly 8 months. She had learned their language, shared their struggles, celebrated their joys. She had found purpose and community. More importantly, she had found herself, not the broken woman who had fled Boston, but someone stronger and more complete. She went to Running Wolf one evening and asked for the marriage ceremony. Not because she felt obligated or because the white authorities required it. Because she wanted it. Because she loved him, had fallen slowly and certainly in love with his strength and gentleness, his wisdom and humor, his unwavering respect for her autonomy. Running Wolf's joy was evident, though he tempered it with careful questions. Was she certain? Did she understand what she was choosing? Sarah answered with conviction. She was choosing love freely given and freely received. She was choosing a partner who saw her as an equal. She was choosing a future built on honesty rather than illusion. The ceremony was beautiful, blending Lakota tradition with Sarah's own beliefs. The village celebrated as if she had always been one of them. Wakharing Waystemna wept with happiness. The children she taught danced and laughed. Elders blessed the union with prayers Sarah felt in her spirit even when she didn't understand every word. When Running Wolf placed his hand over her heart and she placed hers over his, Sarah felt the final pieces of her fractured soul settle into place. Their wedding night was tender and patient, Running Wolf attentive to every sign of discomfort or hesitation. Sarah discovered that intimacy could be healing rather than harmful, could be an expression of trust rather than an exercise in control. She cried afterward, but these were tears of release and gratitude. Running Wolf held her close and whispered words of love in both English and Lakota, painting promises of a future they would build together. Years later, when Sarah told her story to Thathienka Weing, now a young woman herself, she would say that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about refusing to let the past define your future. Thomas had wounded her deeply, but Running Wolf had shown her that one person's cruelty didn't have to determine her capacity for joy. The Lakota people had given her community when she felt utterly alone. The prairie had given her space to breathe and grow and transform. Sarah Bennett, who had boarded a train west with nothing but trauma and desperation, had become Sarah Running Wolf, teacher, wife, mother to children both biological and chosen, bridge between cultures, and most importantly, a woman who had reclaimed her own spirit. The scars remained, visible reminders of where she had been. But they no longer defined her. She had learned to carry her pain without drowning in it, to love without losing herself, to trust without surrendering her strength. She had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be healed by someone who sees your wounds and loves you anyway. The prairie sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, and Sarah stood with her husband's hand in hers, watching the horizon and feeling, for the first time in her life, completely and perfectly home.